A forecasting model used by CIA sheds surprising new light on the future of U.S.-China relationship. The Biden administration might cut tariffs. The Chinese Premier Li Keqiang might play a more prominent role going forward. Russia's war on Ukraine could potentially change the equation on trade tensions. How does the model actually work? Will the predictions turn out to be accurate? Joining me today to discuss the model is John Grady, founding principal of the forecasting firm The Canary Group and an architect of the game model. John, thank you so much for being here with me.
Hi, a pleasure to be here.
So John, before we start, can you please introduce yourself to our audience a little bit? How did you come up with the idea of running a game theory exercise to forecast the trajectory of U.S.-China relationship?
Well, specifically, this was a project focused on forecasting U.S.-China relations, focused on trade. Prior to this, I did a very popular game theory project on the Quad with CNBC. And that was later made into an internationally televised documentary for its surprisingly accurate predictions. At the time, Bob Davis, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who was recently the senior editor on China and trade for the Wall Street Journal, wrote a very interesting piece for Politico on a multilateral framework for trade on the Indo-Pacific. And that seemed very similar to the Quad piece in the sense that we see these overlapping multilateral groupings forming in the Indo-Pacific region. And I thought it would be a very interesting project to propose to Bob to see whether we could forecast where trade can go with US and China. And that led us to where we are today.
I wanted to turn to sort of the backbone of the exercise a little bit, the Bgm model. I wonder if you can walk us through the basics of a Bgm model. How does the model actually work? And what are some examples of applications in the past?
The model is a very sophisticated game theoretic computational model. The model assumes two very important features. A, that actors are rational, and B, that they will act in what they think is their self-interest. Using the equations with computational power, we map out decisions, negotiations based upon stakeholders, the different characteristics associated with the stakeholders, and we can then inform based upon that information where the different stakeholders will go, and importantly enough, the issue that we're looking to forecast. The project with CNBC was very popular. I point to that again. The model was also in the Wall Street Journal, accurately forecasting the Comcast-NBC deal. The model can forecast a range of different outcomes. It's focused on negotiations, from political negotiations to business and economic negotiations. My focus with the Politico report was on trade negotiations. It is very interesting where we have an opportunity to forecast macro and trade relations, which are very difficult things to forecast. We do this through game theory. We do it through game theory because we are able to forecast negotiations between different stakeholders. And then from there, we could forecast policy outcomes. And for the investor community, we can then inform possible implications from those decisions. It's a very interesting exercise.
Right, and a key ingredient, as you mentioned, is stakeholders and their influence. I wonder if you can talk more about that process. How did you recruit them? And how did the game proceed from there? Just, give us a step-by-step brief overview of how the game actually proceeds.
The Politico project recruited some of the leading experts on U.S.-China trade relations. Bob recruited the experts. Generally, I like to recruit the experts through the client because it's the client's data then from that perspective. The project included focusing on the different stakeholders from the American and Chinese counterparts. The forecast project was dealing with the different stakeholders in terms of how influential they were on the issue, how focused, what their positions were, how resolved or lack thereof they were on the issue. The China data was very interesting because we found a large number of economically minded officials from China interested in deal making with the US. On the same day as the Politico project being released, Nikkei released a very interesting report indicating that Xi Jinping sent Vice President Wang Qishan to Korea ahead of the Quad meeting to convey to American officials that the Chinese government was open to dialogue, particularly in light of the recent economic downturn. Mm-hmm. As a result of that surprising development, we have additional evidence that the model's surprising predictions are quite accurate at this point.
I see. And if you don't mind, can you sort of tell us a little bit about the final result of the game? There are several predictions that are quite surprising, as you briefly alluded to. Were those findings surprising to you? What's sort of the mechanism or the intuition behind that result?
I take an agnostic view with regard to the data. I take an agnostic view with the inputs of the data. So it doesn't surprise me as much as it would surprise other people because I just let the data take me wherever it goes. And then I run a number of different simulations to observe whether there would be changes in the output of the game. We observed very interesting results with the output with regard to the Politico report. The information developed from that study indicated that, as I said, a number of senior ranking Chinese officials will move closer to American officials on the trade tariff issue. Mm-hmm. On the US side, the stakeholders are particularly interesting for the different reasons that they wish to engage with China on trade. For example, we see Janet Yellen advocating for cutting the tariffs as a result of increased inflation. We see individuals like Dalip Singh who advocates publicly for cutting the tariffs as a result of what he calls tactical opportunity to create an environment for deal making with China over Russia and Ukraine. There are incredible potential opportunities for deal making between US and China over this issue. The trade tariffs have created a hostile environment between the two countries, and the lifting of the tariffs should hopefully alleviate some of the underlying tensions in between the two countries and actually promote economic productivity and growth for the two countries, since the tariffs have played a role in increased inflation.
Right. I mean, reading the report, I find sort of the data on the US side more accurate potentially than the data on the Chinese side, mostly because Chinese politics is such a black box. How do you actually know Liu He's influence is a third of that of Xi Jinping's, while Li Keqiang's influence is only a tenth of that of Xi Jinping's? Was that also the experts' sort of take on things, especially the experts on the Chinese side who assign influence scores to the players from China?
With regard to the data, of course, we know less about China than we do the US, but I'm looking for information on the different stakeholders from the Chinese side that are in the neighborhood of where we want them to be. Right. Knowing that information, we are then able to develop an understanding of where the different Chinese stakeholders will go. I point again back to the CNBC Quad project from over 6 months ago. A similar process happened. I forecasted that there would be factions developing in the Chinese government, something that a consensus of world-leading Chinese experts did not think would happen. George Soros recently spoke about the situation, saying that Xi Jinping was under attack by officials inspired by the ideas of Deng Xiaoping. We see factions right now being reported by different media outlets over economics and trade. So I was able to produce an output of forecasts that outperformed the consensus view of world-leading experts who are very thoughtful and smart. likewise with this situation as well. Yes, I do not have as granular of a data as the US side, but I'm still able to make outperforming forecasts that are quite informative for different people.
Right, and that's quite impressive. What are the key takeaways you want people to sort of get from that exercise?
The key lessons from this project should be that we should hope for easing tensions and not believe that things are fatalistic, that just because there are tensions does not mean that we can try to find ways to work together to find opportunities for coordination and collaboration. The tariff reduction is an opportunity for cooperation between the two countries. I feel taking a long view between the two major countries is important, and not to view tensions in the short term as something that would be indicative for the future. There's a lot of work to be done between the two countries.